You are listening to Kubernetes Bytes, a podcast bringing you the latest from the world of cloud-native data management. My name is Ryan Wallner, and I'm joined by Bhavin Shah, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. We'll be sharing our thoughts on recent cloud-native news and talking to industry experts about their experiences and challenges managing the wealth of data in today's cloud-native ecosystem. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We're coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Today is July 13th, 2023. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. Let's dive into it. Speaking of evenings, we're doing this in the evening. It doesn't happen that often, I feel like.
I know. Yeah, this is the only second episode.
A nightcap in my hand, which is always a good thing. I know you don't trust yourself to drink liquids anymore after the last episode. I don't know if anybody caught that, but Bhavin just shirted himself with the water. So go take a look at that. That's fun. We had fun with that one.
Yeah. Go check the YouTube video of our previous episode.
That's good. What have you been up to?
I don't know. I'm just keeping busy. We have AWS Summit in New York City, so going to attend that. But we're also doing a workshop the day before, so just busy building out the workshop.
Nice.
Yeah, a lot of things. Just keeping busy with work. I'm excited that in 3 weeks I have some PTO coming. So After the summit next week, I'll be in Banff, Canada.
So is this national park again?
Yeah, yes. National parks, man. Finally, do you
have a running number of how many you've been to?
I had at some point, but I don't remember it right now.
There's the idea for your background on your wall. You put the national parks.
Yeah, that's a good idea, man. Thank you.
Tell us your story.
Yeah, this is my first trip to Canada, so I'm excited about the Banff National Park. I have all the bookings and everything done for a while now. Just today I realized that I need a reservation for a shuttle that takes us to one of those points.
Yeah,
which I thought wasn't needed, so I need to do some more research. So I'm not as prepared as I usually am, but I'm excited about
more of an adventure that way.
Yeah, true. How about you, Ryan?
Think about it like that. Speaking of traveling, I have some PTO coming up next week, so I'm pumped about. That was one of the long moto camping trips. Yeah. Although with all the crazy amount of torrential downpouring, this was a whole Northeast trip. So it's New York through Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, up to the Canadian border. And they had to shut down the entire Vermont section. Because so many roads, so many homes, so many towns were flooded. It's really just an insane scenario there. So we're basically planning on doing the first 3 or 4 days and then seeing if we could just go lend a hand to some of the communities and members we know up there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Basically shovel sludge and stuff out of their homes, which is just nuts. So we'll see.
Some of those videos were terrifying.
Yeah. And where I grew up in the Hudson Valley, New York, they also got a ton of rain, which took out roads and all sorts of stuff, which I thought was bad. And that was day one. And then the next day, everything just went nuts in Vermont. And they said this was more rain than they got in 2011 with Hurricane Irene. Which did cause crazy massive flooding up there, but it was worse than that. Just because we've gotten a ton of rain, and so everything was already swelled, right? Yeah. And then this just if you look at the radar, the time lapse of it, it's just this giant. It just didn't move. It just sat there. I think some towns got 10 or 12 inches of raining in one day, which is insane.
Hopefully people are safe. They knew this was coming, so they were able to move out. But again, you can't do anything about the houses or homes, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, rebuild, right? At that point, you just evaluate and, figure it out.
Not fun.
Not fun. So hopefully we can help out, and we'll see if we have time to shoot up there or if they want us up there, that kind of thing. It's been a week and a half or something. So, they shut down those. So it throws a loop in our trip, but, that's nothing compared to what they're dealing with. So we have to take it with a grain of salt and just take what we get. So, anyway, moving on from that, we do have an awesome topic today, awesome guest.
Yes.
But before we dive into who that guest is and what the topic is, let's dive into our cloud native news. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I just have a few quick things, right? HashiCorp, everybody's favorite, infrastructure as code company. That's what I love them for, for Terraform.
That's very presuming.
They published a state of the cloud survey that they did with Forrester. The reason I want to talk about, I linked it in our show notes, was they are actually talking about multi-cloud and the advantages of using it. I know there is a lot of noise right now in the ecosystem, depending on who you are talking to, right? About like, oh, cloud repatriation. Again, that's happening, but the scale with which people are talking about it, I don't think it's happening as much. And this report kind of reinforces that, like, there are benefits to multi-cloud. Again, last week when we spoke to Surya, right, he's like, even startups are moving clouds because of cloud credit. So a good report to check out talks about the things that you absolutely need to figure out. So if you don't have things like reliability and security and cost management figured out, you will have a bad experience. But then if you are taking care of those things, you can take advantage of all the abstraction that's provided by these infrastructure vendors.
Yeah, and the report has some interesting things in there. Like, multi-cloud isn't just about enabling sort of technology; it's also keeping and retaining talent, right? Someone being able to be familiar in one cloud versus the other, and being able to enable those developers to use those clouds, things like that. Has some really good numbers, and the spend numbers that talk about even in sort of the economic times. Is not, I guess, not surprising seeing what we have seen, but it's kind of enlightening.
I know. Yeah. Next thing was just a quick note about Istio. I know Istio used to be a non-CNCF thing, which was then donated to CNCF by Google Cloud and IBM. Now it has officially matured or graduated from an incubating status to a graduated project. So it joins the likes of Kubernetes and Flux and Argo CD and those kinds of projects that have a lot of backing from the community. So Istio just joins that club, which again, we knew it had support, but now it's an official CNCF graduated project.
Cool, very cool.
A couple of new things. Instacart, right? Like, I'm sure everybody might have ordered Instacart at some point during COVID, but you didn't?
Oh, no, I love it. I still use it.
Okay, you love it. Okay. So they actually...
When I don't have like time to get down there, but yeah.
Yeah, they actually run some of their infrastructure on Kubernetes. They have a new blog which talks about how they moved from using an AWS managed service with AWS EMR and moved to running Apache Flink on Kubernetes. And they talk about the benefits that they saw in terms of operational efficiency. So like their ops people are not spending as much time managing and building those things. Developer productivity also shot up. So there were a few benefits. Again, it's at a different scale, right? Like if you're a 5-person team, I don't know if running things on your own on Kubernetes makes sense, but for a company that has more people with the required skill set, this might make sense. So that was a good read.
Yeah, and the background of that whole company, right? The amount of scale that they had so quickly, right, because of the pandemic, that's an interesting story in and of itself. So maybe they use Kubernetes I have a funny story as well about Instacart because I used it a lot during the pandemic. I have some small driveway on a steep driveway, and one of the Instacart drivers like used my sort of like garage area to like back out instead of just backing down the driveway, which a lot of people do, and wound up running into my house. Just like taking out part of like the 2x4s on the side. I was like, what? And it just left and then left. So I had like a camera and so I called Instacart. I was like, what do I do about this? Like, is this a you problem or a me problem? And basically they said it's just like any accident. You can like report it and do insurance. And I was like, so basically I couldn't do anything. But
would you sue Instacart for insurance money or the driver?
I think it's just like an accident to the driver. Like they have the driver information. I didn't bother with it because I'm like, at the end of the day, all I wish is that like just like stopped and like knocked at my door and said like I did this thing, but nope, hit and run. I guess on my garage. Moving on.
And the last thing was just talking about an open source project called KubeLinter. I know it is relevant to what we are going to discuss today, right? I know I haven't spoken about what the topic is, but it helps you analyze your YAML files and Helm charts that you might be creating. It checks it for just security vulnerabilities, whether it's written correctly, whether it has any issues inside those YAML files. It identifies all of that for you and can be customized as well. So a good project to use. It's still in its alpha phase, but something that I wanted to highlight given the topic that we have for today.
Yeah, we all know YAML is a nightmare when you're dealing with a lot of it. So
I remember you did a talk at KubeCon, right?
Oh, I did a debates,
Yeah.
YAML versus JSON or something
I
like that.
forgot which side you were on.
There was no winning side. Okay.
No. Which side you
I
were
was.
on?
I
I
think I
didn't
had to
say.
play. I think I had to play for the YAML side. And we
Okay.
were at KubeCon, so a lot of people
Yeah.
had scars still fresh.
Nice.
So it was a tough one, but yeah, that
Okay.
was a good one.
Yeah, but that's it for news for me.
Cool. A couple things for me. Crunchy Postgres for Kubernetes. So databases on Kubernetes,
Mm-hmm.
near and dear topic to this podcast for us. They released version 5.4. I've always been a fan of what they've been doing. They had an operator early on,
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff. But 5.4 has support for ARM, which I think is pretty cool.
Ooh.
And a lot of performance stuff that I don't fully understand, so I'm not going to go into it. But things like huge pages and table spaces and all that stuff. If you're into that, and then I like that in this in this release, they say documentation enhancements. Just
I know.
that's good.
That's
That
needed,
feels good
dude.
in my heart there.
Yeah.
Just top level in the release.
That's awesome.
The next one is all about sort of AWS being targeted by sort of new hacking techniques and malware and things like that. So I might not say this correctly, but Scarlet Eel, or it could be Scarlet Teal. I don't know. I'm not sure. I like Scarlet Eel. Sounds way cooler, and I'm gonna.
It looks like a sushi that you might get at a noodle shop.
Scarlet Eel, like a red sushi. Yeah. This whole sort of approach was identified in, I think, February 2023, but it's evolved. So this whole sort of attack has evolved to now target, again, not a new thing for us, misconfigured clusters and AWS policies. And there's a lot of specifics around this new approach being very specific to AWS Fargate. So it can kind of get into containers, identify if it's on a Fargate container, branch out from there, get more credentials. And they're actually using some well-known exploitation tools that are available to just mean anybody here, right? Pacu is one of them, and some others. So they're kind of taking a modernized approach to this. And again, this is all fueled by a lot of the complexities that are in this, which is kind of ties back to our previous episode if you want to go take a look, listen to that. So I just thought it was really interesting, and that it's specifically targeting AWS and Fargate and things like that. So go spend some time.
Secure.
Go be secure.
or at least if you are looking for your next job and thinking, okay, what you might do with all this AI buzz, go just beef up on security skills. I think I'm learning that as part of my day job as well. I was messing around with SCC policies and OpenShift today. So security is
which is frustrating in and of itself, and that's
it is.
That's like a simple side of things. If you're new to this entire community, Kubernetes in general, go dive in there. I think it's a huge part of it, which leads me to my next news item, which is about learning how to troubleshoot Kubernetes. So we've talked about the CKA exam on this. This article actually gives you a really kind of in-depth view about how things are troubleshooted, how to understand some things like crash loop backoffs, and it talks about the fact that 30% of that exam is troubleshooting, right? You have to know what's going on. And I think it just, again, ties to this episode that we're going to talk about with the complexity and how to troubleshoot, and a lot of people and a lot of SREs and a lot of DevOps engineers spending time in that zone of banging their I should say fingers, but heads probably on the keyboard troubleshooting Kubernetes. So a really interesting article. If you haven't taken the CK or are interested, or just in that topic in general, go take a look at it. Gives you some actual examples and things like that. So yes, that is the news. We do have a couple things we want to mention in this week's Cube Weekly. They do have a GitOps micro survey. Just call it a survey. But,
microservices survey for GitOps? I don't know.
It's containerized. It's a survey. It's gone down a rat hole there. But anyway, GitOps micro survey. If you have touched these tools, we've talked a lot about them on the show lately. Go take that survey. Just kind of help out the CNCF, get a good sort of idea of what people are up to and what they're poking at and things like that. So, and I'll turn it over to you for the last bit.
Yeah, I think last thing was around our own Kubernetes Bytes. Sorry,
I said I'll turn it over for the last bit. Hey. All right, I'll let you continue.
This is what happens when we record this show after hours.
Yeah, maybe it's more fun that way.
Yeah, it is. Oh, are you saying the morning and afternoon episodes are not fun? Come on,
Oh,
Brian.
they're so much fun.
Yeah. So we realized after the last episode when we shared the news that we have a new Slack channel or Slack workspace for everybody to join and collaborate. We realized the link that we had wasn't really an invite link, so we
Yeah,
fixed
we
that.
goofed.
Yeah, it's again part of the journey, right? We're learning in public here. But now if you go to bit.ly/K8S bytes, Kubernetes Bytes with the smaller Kubernetes version, you should be able to join our channel. So
Yes.
we'll include it in our show notes. I'm sure we'll post through our social channels as well. We have a QR code for it, so it's easy to sign up. But yeah, come join us.
Come join us. Give us episode ideas. Tell us what you like, don't
Yeah.
like. Everything is on there.
Yeah.
We have a
Although
whole
we'll
separate
feel
channel.
bad if you say something that you didn't like. So be careful.
Just be kind.
Yeah, just be
lead
kind.
with
Yes.
kindness. That's
Yeah.
all. We want to learn from what you think.
Yeah.
That is absolutely something we want to do. Yeah. Anyway, so go check that out. We'll put it in the show notes as well. Let's move on to today's topic. Today's topic is all about sort of using new AI tooling and approaches that we see commonly with things like ChatGPT and other things like that. Using that to basically help troubleshoot and identify problems and fix problems in Kubernetes. Really cool topic. The founder of RunWhen, Kyle Forster, is the CEO there at RunWhen. He'll talk about a little bit about the company, but also more generally, he was senior director at Google, Kubernetes specifically, and a founder of Big Switch Network. So definitely great guest, and we're excited to have him on to talk about this topic. I think we've been itching to do some AI topics, so hopefully we'll do some more as well.
We have been doing the ChatGPT question for a while, but then I really I was really excited for, I am actually not was, but I'm really excited for this episode where we talk about how AI is actually impacting the Kubernetes ecosystem. So I'm excited.
Yeah, very, very cool stuff. And we are going to forego this week's ChatGPT question for our guest because the entire episode is about AI, and you can only take so much AI. But we will talk about it a little bit after we do the interview. So why don't we get Kyle on the show? All right, welcome to Kubernetes Bytes, Kyle. It's a pleasure to have you here. Why don't you give our listeners and watchers a little introduction of who you are and what you're up to?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on. As a follower of the show for a while, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
My name is Kyle Forster. I left the Kubernetes team at Google a couple of years ago to start a company called RunWhen. We build tools for small teams and understaffed teams that are currently using Kubernetes. We do this using a combination of AI and expert open source community.
Okay, so you just said the magic word, AI. Like what? How does RunWhen use artificial intelligence? And like before we also talk about like how RunWhen uses it, can we also talk about, I'm assuming you have been getting a lot of these questions. So like what are LLMs? What are large language models? How do they work? And why are people suddenly so excited about AI and the whole new wave of GPTs? Yeah.
Well, I could give a short answer or a long answer.
Medium.
Yeah. No, anything works. Just go for it. Yeah.
On the what are LLMs, there are a lot of papers now on what these things are doing under the covers, but I do think of them as an API endpoint. You send some text and it sends a bunch of text back.
Yeah.
I'm a believer. I can talk about how we're using them specifically, but I'm a believer that we'll see kind of three waves. Because at first, if you look at ChatGPT, which is kind of the big popularization of LLMs, and the first real open endpoint for a large one of these, it feels like magic. I mean, it really, really does. I'm assuming that almost all of your listeners have used ChatGPT at least a few times in the last few minutes.
Minutes, yes.
I think, look, the cost of building a good chatbot interface with these has now gone down. I mean, gone down by about a factor of 100 since OpenAI opened up their API endpoints. I mean, just compared to 2022 is amazing. I'm just a believer that chatbots will be a very short period in history. I was on with the service chatbot for my ISP a couple of days ago, trying to cancel my subscription. This was for the second time, and I'm ripping my hair out. even if this thing could apologize more eloquently, the fact that it can't cancel my subscription and it keeps sending me to a web page that is down doesn't help
Right.
anybody. Awful.
Yes. Like, okay, I know like you are answering a question, but just a tangent. Like I was talking to, there's also a website called pi.com, right? Like Pi is another one of these chatbots. I was talking to it. I was like, I need some landscapers. And it was giving me answers like ABC landscaping company, XYZ landscaping company in near my area. I was like, do they really exist, or it's just throwing some things on? And I was like, can you give me a link to their website? And it just described like what a website might look like for a landscaping company, and that's it. Like it didn't give me any links. So yes, I agree. Like we need these to be better.
I mean, the incompetent chatbot that speaks perfect English is not moving the industry that far forward. But unfortunately, I think, frankly, we're going to see a ton of those. Like despite like the DevOps SRE area, like we're going to see every vendor and their friend is going to put a chatbot interface, and I think we'll see a huge number of releases over the course of the rest of this year, and then we'll see a big backlash next year, and people will say, "Oh, LLMs suck because there are all these bad chatbots." I hope that this will be a short-lived chapter one of the industry. The really, really interesting thing, call it the cost of building a chatbot's gone down by a factor of about 100. The cost of building a really good search engine has gone down by a factor of about 10,000.
Whew. Okay.
I think that will be the big deal. LLMs are the really, really expensive part of building a search engine. If you build search, if you want to build really, really good search, you don't take the text that somebody sent you in a query and try to match it against the text in all of the target web pages that you're trying to search. You try to take as much information about the user, their current location, their language, their last name, and you try to build up a search intent. And you try to take all the targets, whether they're web pages, because everybody's familiar with consumer web search, or whether you're Amazon, it's products, whether it's database rows, whether it's some more interesting things we can talk about. And you're trying to build up an intent for each of those. And you don't search text to text. You're really trying to search intent for intent. And that's where LLMs are pretty amazing. Dump a bunch of information about the user, including their query, and say, what do you think is this user's intent? Grab a bunch of text about a database row, about a web page, in our particular case, about a troubleshooting task. Dump it to ChatGPT to say, what do you think that intent is? And then you do intent to intent match, and you have phenomenally good search.
Do you think anybody's doing that today, or that's like a vision that you have for the future?
Oh, well, I know I just spent 20 hours last week on like UI designs and algorithm tweaks, so I can tell you at least, score one. We're right now tracking 11 different vendor projects using LLMs, most of which are just chatbots. Actually, 8 of 11. There are 3 that I think are interesting on the vendor side, and then we're tracking 4 different LLM, SRE, and DevOps projects amongst the FANG companies and amongst FANG teams. And every single one of those is active search.
Got it.
Gotcha.
They're all folks that know search, know the capabilities, know the expensive parts, know the hard parts very, 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 very well.
Have a huge data set if they are a FANG company.
But with LLMs, you barely even need the data set. It's fantastic.
That's
you
true.
just ask it to describe intent, and it'll take care of the rest for you.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, I think there's a big part of this that search and chatbots are familiar to people. So it's an easy way for getting someone who really doesn't understand what's going on behind the scenes to use it, right? And I know that what you're up to at RunWhen is sort of reimagining, we don't need chatbots, or maybe there's different ways to use it. And I'd love to hear more about sort of what was the genesis story of kind of like why you saw this problem and are starting to solve it with AI and specifically with Kubernetes at the moment.
Sure. Look, the genesis story for RunWhen was just at my last role, a huge percentage of my users were stuck. As you guys know, Kubernetes is hard, but we did study after study, and I don't know how many, like in the hundreds of customer interviews specifically on this topic, that I became very, very, very convinced the hard part is not Kubernetes itself. There are 800 open source packages, give or take, that represent around 70% of the Kubernetes workloads in the world. Across any individual cluster, there's an average of somewhere around 40 to 60 for a small cluster and many hundreds for a large cluster. And so if you look at like the problem that somebody has managing Kubernetes, it's not only Kubernetes, but they need to be an expert in troubleshooting the 40 different open source packages that their company is probably running.
Yeah.
And it's not like when you go from one company to the next, it's the exact same set of 40. Actually, the set of 40 is fairly diverse. So to be an expert, you need to know how to troubleshoot like 800 different open source packages. Like that's not a human capability.
Right. Yeah, that's valid.
And it's not like open source is going to slow down. So, there's like 12,000 total, but it's not like we're seeing that much collapse into like, the top 30 are really popular. The top 30 represent about 20%, give or take, of the worldwide workloads. So you still need to know a huge number. And most teams can't afford to have experts that have that much coverage. You have an expert in a couple areas, but you really need some fast access to a real troubleshooting expert, a real, somebody to really help you set up monitoring, alerting, somebody to respond to alerts, figure out, is this a temporary issue, figure out performance optimization.
Right.
And you need that expert to kind of pop in, like not even for days or weeks. You need that expert to pop in for like 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah, that's fair.
And
I feel like, part of this, we've, as an industry, sort of done it to ourselves. Like every time we advance, we put another abstraction on something and it goes deeper and deeper. I feel like the movie Inception, by the end of the movie, you're like, where am I in this movie? Like I'm kind of confused towards the end of it. I feel like if you're deep in Kubernetes, you're like, how did I get here? I started off just like my pod wasn't running and now I'm like debugging all this other stuff. Besides the point. So DevOps engineers and SREs, right? They have to be sort of a unicorn to know all of this stuff. They have many challenges, but what specifically are they struggling with that you've seen in sort of the past and what made you create this company that can be solved, I guess, or helped with AI? Is it just a matter of information at their fingertips to make them faster at doing it, or really having something with the knowledge of what's going on inside of Kubernetes?
I came to the conclusion, at least for this, that there were a couple of different areas. First, I'm talking about like observability. We make a really, really big deal of observability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very important. Clearly, there's been a huge amount, like $4.5 billion spent on observability tools. That's just the top 4 last year. Yeah, we make a big deal. But of all the Kubernetes teams that I interviewed on, I asked the question, okay, so how many of your troubleshooting sessions end at like monitoring and alerting? And they're like, well, like 20%. Okay, so 80% of the time you have somebody popping back onto the CLI.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Like you think like there must be some thing we could do here. That kind of became the starting point. Like let's help people the moment that they pop back on the CLI. And then how much can we help real experts who really, 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 really know their stack troubleshoot themselves? Some, but I think that's actually fairly limited. How much can we help real experts that need to communicate with other people that they're mentoring, that they're helping? Like, okay, that we can actually make decently more efficient. And how much can we help people that are fairly new to it, where their expert happens to be in a different time zone, is not online yet, is on vacation, is busy in another meeting, has a massive engineering deadline themselves coming up in 2 days.
Sure.
That I think is something that we can really, 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 really help with.
Okay, so you're talking a lot about troubleshooting and helping engineers like focus on other things and not just spend their majority of the time looking at logs or going to the CLI, right? A lot of early low-hanging fruit examples that we have seen, at least on the interwebs, is people using these chatbots to generate YAML files for a stateful set object or come up with some scripts. Is that a use case that you see that, like, again, is that a use case that you see? Because from my perspective, right, I can't fully trust the YAML file that it's giving me, because in my personal experience, I've seen ChatGPT just make up steps for things that don't exist. And then obviously I don't want to push or copy paste anything from that into my production environment or even my test dev environment, right? Like, how do we solve that? Like, in addition to troubleshooting, do you see AI helping SREs in any other areas?
We tried very hard to get LLMs to create troubleshooting commands.
Mm-hmm.
None of it worked. Like, not at all. Like, interestingly enough, when we actually, all of us now pretty actively use LLMs when we're doing any work in JavaScript, any work in Go, and any work in Python. Those are 3 big languages that we're building the backend.
Okay. Yeah.
And I kind of came to the conclusion for those, you can kind of just skim the code that an LLM generates, even GitHub Copilot, and you can kind of have some confidence that it's doing the thing. Now, when it comes to generating like CLI commands, every single one we've just found needed human QA. And as soon as you get done like recreating the setup where that troubleshooting command is useful, you really may as well have just written the command yourself.
That's true.
Also, when you want to do some hinting to say, hey, if this command presents this output, I want to do some hints to say, all right, this is totally healthy. We don't need to chase this. Or, hey, look, this is weird. And this needs either more AI attention or needs to be escalated to a human. That LLMs were like not good at all with no direction. But if a human gave them some hints, then they were fantastically good at interpreting the results.
Gotcha. So again, from what I took from that statement was we're good at LLMs and AI will be good at being a co-pilot, not necessarily an autopilot. Like, you obviously can't trust it to do everything. But if you are an expert, if you know what you're doing, but you just need a head start on troubleshooting something or figuring something out, I think this is a perfect way. I know, like for my personal use, right? Sometimes I'll ask it a question. Maybe it gets me like 50% there, 60% there, and then I can take that information and then do my own thing. I think that's what it feels like people should be using AI and LLM for, at least in 2023. Maybe things will change in 2025, but for now,
I think the hallucinations thing isn't going to change. Like, I became convinced that like getting these things to write really good command line is not going to. I don't think that's going to change with GPT-5.
Gotcha.
I'd be really curious to see if like you could have like a bake-off or sort of a race of someone who's just really good at Googling and then someone using like ChatGPT to solve the same problem, right? Because I feel like half the time I want ChatGPT or an LLM to give me an actual result for it to be useful. I don't need it to be sort of a more efficient Googler than I am.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't really solve the problem for me. So I don't know. That'd be an interesting problem.
What they're really good at, like, if you already have a set corpus, so like in our particular case, all of our troubleshooting scripts are actually written by experts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we pay them. When a customer pays us, we actually pay them a royalty in return. The search engine through those is extremely good. Like, so a user says like, hey, Redis is down. Great. Here are 30 scripts that I think are relevant to Redis being down. Some of which are about Redis, some of which are not about Redis at all. They're about troubleshooting Kubernetes deployment, some of which are just about checking warning messages and logs. But it's smart enough to be able to say, hey, given I'm trying to troubleshoot Redis and given the data that we have underneath, here's a bunch of stuff that I think is very relevant. That other area where they're insanely good, because if you think about this first, it's like the first instance of search.
Mm-hmm.
They're insanely good at taking the output of one troubleshooting script, turning that into a search query, searching and finding another relevant one.
Nice.
So they're really good at chaining, they're awful at writing the troubleshooting scripts themselves. We found LLMs were really good at like just chaining these things together into really, really interesting like root cause sessions. You're like, okay, I get it. Like it like went down this path thinking maybe this was a problem, popped back and then went down this path. And now suddenly, these things can run like hundreds of troubleshooting commands in a 5-minute period. And then you get this nice like summary of, well, here was the steps that it took,
Sure.
and here's what it thought kind of the root cause was.
Gotcha. So you're saying that all of these different steps are kind of automated. Like it runs all of these get commands for you, troubleshooting steps for you, and gives you a good summary. Do you think at any point, like, again, we can talk about RunWhen as well, right? And the concept of these digital assistants.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't be the ones who are discovering this stuff. I think the patterns that we're discovering, a lot of other people will follow.
Yep. Makes sense, right? Like, so is there any form of reinforcement learning? Like, are you teaching the chatbot at certain points during the day, like, okay, this is the right way to do it? Like, no, the fourth command that you had doesn't really make sense. Don't do it the next time around. Is that happening? Or
absolutely,
is it like a vendor like RunWhen that has to make those changes and customers are just trying to use those chatbots or digital assistants?
I mean, I think that's where that's where I think the role of a vendor gets really interesting here, because we're even going through UI decisions to say, all right, when somebody gives a training tip, to say, oh, wow, yeah, given that issue, here was really the right thing to run. We're going through UI questions to say, when does somebody want to keep that private, and when are they willing to contribute that troubleshooting tip to the community itself? Which is where I think that's where like vendors and communities can play a really interesting role. Because say you're a really, really small Kubernetes shop and you're facing some issue for the first time, can you get like, wow, I now have the knowledge not only of these like couple hundred experts that are troubleshooting commands, but I have like all the knowledge of like a Shopify like coming.
Yeah, that would be awesome, because we always hear about like the case studies that we hear at things like KubeCon are for large scale environments, like big enterprise shops that are doing this at scale, but they don't usually apply to the best practices don't usually apply to like a 2-person team running 2 applications. So I think just having access to the expertise that has been built inside that Shopify, I think will help smaller organizations adopt Kubernetes faster and be comfortable with it, I guess.
That's 100. That was 100% my thesis. I mean, if I could have taken in my last role, if I could have just taken some of the troubleshooting documentation, even that some of my larger clients had already written, and if I could have just given that to my medium clients, I actually tried with one and they agreed, but it just turned out to be too much work to scrub out host names, IP addresses, etc.
Okay, yeah.
Like if we could just take this and make this public, it would change the game for so many smaller Kubernetes shops. Anyways,
but I think I do have a concern there, right? Like we have heard case studies about how product managers have basically used ChatGPT and maybe given access to data that to OpenAI that shouldn't be, right? And we also see a lot of bigger enterprises not asking their employees not to use these LLMs. How do we find that balance, right? I like the idea of learning from the best and then helping everybody, but are people comfortable sharing their troubleshooting scripts back to the ecosystem? Do you think this will be more successful because it's done inside the CNCF landscape where everybody is more comfortable being open? Or how do we handle that?
I think sharing the troubleshooting scripts themselves, 99% of the time, these are generic. I mean, having reviewed so many of my clients' troubleshooting scripts, like, okay, you're troubleshooting Nginx, you're troubleshooting Kafka, you're troubleshooting Postgres. And so many of these, like, well, 1% applies to your own code. You get such incredibly good telemetry into your own code by doing all of the troubleshooting for all of the systems around it, most of which are open source. So, I think a huge amount of just like open source troubleshooting covers like 99 to 95% of somebody's needs and can get somebody to the root cause really, really, really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, having a community of people developing these scripts definitely is above and beyond any single person could do, right? A single SRE who's, the knight in shining armor of your problems at a company, right? It kind of brings me to, how can how can these AI personas sort of be as good as that SRE, and how does someone trust them, right? Because I think people are getting used to hearing about things like misinformation and sort of the term hallucinations I've heard with with LLMs, although I don't fully understand it. But like, how do they go about trusting someone, this AI persona, as they would that trusty person, the SRE that they constantly can go back to and they'll help them?
I mean, I think this is where the troubleshooting scripts themselves have to be written by experts.
Sure.
They just have to be. Like we tried so hard doing it the other way, and we're sitting here in the middle of it with a heck of a lot of incentive to trust. And I couldn't get there. So I think that you have to have your troubleshooting scripts written by experts. You have to make those experts famous. I think that's really important. Okay. Those are people. That's not just, I don't think that should be co-pilot fodder. We make a lot of decisions around making the name of the author of this script show up in large letters, making their photo show up in large letters, making these people famous. We make sure that they get paid for this work. And that, like, as a user, like you are keenly aware that you are using troubleshooting scripts that were contributed by 35 people, including these 3 people who have spent 5 years troubleshooting Nginx, and these 2 people who have spent 5 years troubleshooting Postgres. I think the LLM part of it, our digital assistants, they're really, they're more like river guides, like helping you say, hey, there's a great script over here.
Yeah.
There's a script over here from this person. There's a great script over here from this person. Hey, given what you're asking for and everything else that I'm seeing, here are 3 great scripts that I recommend. And so you put them in the role of recommending humans' work, which is where they're really good.
A guided trip through troubleshooting. I like that. I mean, seeing how willing people are to go to Stack Overflow and just like try something that who knows put on there. They probably know nothing about that person or why they put it there or if it works, right? I imagine this is a big step up, right? That's the way I see it. I mean, this
looks good to me. Like we can improve on this.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I think the next step for that is, even these are humans. Humans make mistakes. Sometimes they won't work. How do you go about sort of improving the quality? What's that sort of process looks like for these scripts?
And I think the first and we found this in our own use. I was surprised, frankly. I thought that a lot of our own scripts who wind up being remediation, the vast majority, like 90 to 95% of ours, are information gathering. And and that's not to say that like it's free. If you gather a ton of information that a human has to look at, you didn't really improve the situation all that much. So there's a lot of information gathering and then summary. And hey, that's why the hinting is really important. This is an issue that's worthy of attention. Or this command just generated like a 4,000 line output, none of which you need to read. That has a lot of value.
Yeah.
The remediation ones, we actually set our system up. This is just a UI thing, but I think it's interesting. With multiple digital assistants and multiple personas, like for our own internal use, we have set up Eager Edgar and Cautious Kathy, and then Admin Alley.
Yeah, love those names.
And Admin Alley actually has materially different RBAC permissions than Cautious Kathy or Eager Edgar.
Ooh.
All of the remediation steps sit in Admin Alley, and the idea being like, if you're asking Admin Alley to do things, be careful. Eager Edgar and Cautious Kathy, and then they're like, run 300 commands. Something will happen.
Yeah. Gotcha. So like, do you ever see, right now you said, right, like it's data gathering phase. Do you ever see us going to like actually, like does Admin Alley, or sorry if I messed up the name, do you ever see them taking over and fixing things for you, not just giving you a summary after running 30 scripts? Like, and just a second part of the question, right? I think the idea of having those community backed or user backed scripts will definitely help, because if I'm running a production environment, if I'm responsible for one, I will not trust AI because that will have an outage and I can lose my job. I can trust a chatbot to give me suggestions of what I should do for my 2-day weekend trip that I have, but not for messing with my day job in my production environment. So like, how do we, that's a great idea, right? Like, so first question is, do you ever see them taking over, like doing things for you? And then how do the community handwritten scripts help with that approach?
I would say, will we see like fully automated remediation bit by bit by bit by bit? I mean, let's start with like, hey, all of Kubernetes is predicated on this idea of the reconciliation loop that itself is doing automated remediation in a very material form compared to its predecessors. So I do think that we'll see some of that bit by bit, mostly like, hey, what are the really practical things? Restarting stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
They made a whole TV series about it, so yes.
These bots can restart things. They can help, hey, wow, our scheduler somehow got itself into a really, really bad state. Okay, add a node for an hour, let the scheduler refigure itself out. Okay, and then delete nodes or scale back down. We're big believers in GitOps. So there's an awful lot of, okay, reconcile, re-reconcile. Oh, all right, roll back. Fair. Okay, we must have a bad PR somewhere. Let's trust that a digital assistant could actually do a rollback to a prior PR, which we know is just going to get the system into a human-approved state that it was in probably an hour ago.
Okay.
I don't think things like fixing configuration, to me, it feels pretty dicey. Like, could I picture any of our AI assistants actually like fundamentally checking new stuff into any of our infra repos?
Nope.
Yeah.
It feels like a stretch.
It sounds like
a stretch.
It sounds like these personas have sort of a context they're allowed to work in, a sort of set of laws, call them Kubernetes Turing laws or something like that, where like shall not edit YAML, right? Versus harming a human or something like that. But how do those things get set in the sense that cautious Kathy is cautious and admin alley does more things?
I mean, between those two examples, we just set it up with our back rules the exact same way. Frankly, like my colleague Shay doesn't particularly like me having any write access into any of our production repos. Like period full, he's like, you get that. You do other things and don't touch these. Change my dev environment anytime I like. So we view the personas. That's a really easy like mental model to pick up and put down on top of personas as well. Like, hey.
Okay.
Admin, like Cautious Kathy, a lot of people on the team can use Cautious Kathy. Okay, let's give Cautious Kathy just our back that we feel pretty comfortable with. Admin alley might be very limited. Only a couple of people have access. So
gotcha.
It's kind of a clean, like, hey, let's take the human mental model we've got and let's apply it to digital. So I think beyond that, like, frankly, tiny tweaks to the way that these things search leads to pretty different like personalities. I mean, we gave these names after like fiddling around with a few configuration files. They didn't figuring out with like a little bit of training.
Yep.
Yeah.
They just developed their own little personalities, and they're kind of fun to watch. And
nice. So
users can name their own, but
that could get weird. I feel like
yeah. So once we have, let's say I have access to Edgar, right, and Kathy, and inside my organization, how does it learn? You already spoke about different levels of RBAC levels, right? So I can have different teams inside my organizations, different people have different levels of access to these digital assistants in the first place. But is there a way for them to learn from what's going on inside my environment, or RunWhen does all the training and learning and evolving these models, and I'm just an end user?
No. I mean, now we're getting like deep in like the vendor stuff, but this is where the vendor stuff A gets hard, and B, this is where we spend a lot of time.
Yeah.
For us, our view is they learn from a couple of different sources. They can actually learn from the person who authored the troubleshooting commands themselves.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you see conditions like this, think of it as almost like SEO. Like, I want to boost my troubleshooting command when I see situations like this. And I think that's actually good. Like SEO is good. So that's one source of learning. One source of learning is from us, like just changing the base models.
Sure.
Which I think that's like how we add value to our 100th customer, then to our 1,000th, and to our 10,000, et cetera. One source is where users actually say, hey, I want this training tip. I'm okay submitting this training tip back to the community.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then the last is like, hey, there's a training tip, but for one reason or another, I want it to be private. And we're still playing with like, do we charge? Like the public training tips are so much more valuable. Do we charge more for private training tips, or for people that want to keep everything private and not give anything? But I don't know. We're still playing around with a whole bunch of different ideas there. But the 4 sources of learning are really important.
Okay. No, I think it would be really cool if the chatbot or the digital assistant can see me troubleshooting something for the first time, and then it comes and like does it for the next 100 times. Like if I get hit the same issue, I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. And that's why we have adopted things like infrastructure as code and GitOps and all of those automation things, principles. But like learn from me and then just do it for me. And that way, I, being the 10x engineer, can scale, and the rest of my team or rest of my organization can be unblocked.
Yeah. The nifty thing is, I'm having a couple of conversations with, some folks, folks who've been doing this in our industry for a long time. I think it changes the way we think about automation, because if you think about, let's take the exact case that you said, with today's automation tools, we would write this in a script to do that. And let's say we refactor our microservices. It's probably broken. Because we would refactor our microservices a lot. And before we were actually using our own product, we were breaking our troubleshooting and regression scripts all the time. It was a real pain in the neck. Now, if you assume instead that like, hey, each little step in the script, maybe you authored it, maybe somebody in the community authored it, but the script is fundamentally orchestrated by a digital assistant that took a whole bunch of training tips. Suddenly you refactor your microservices and you don't change a thing. it'll just kind of ignore the broken commands, and it'll probably pick up a whole bunch of commands that are relevant to the new architecture without you ever actually changing anything. And that's what we found that's really cool, especially for things like, I want to tie this so every time an alert comes in, Eager Edgar goes off and works on it for 10 minutes.
Yep. Sure. Yeah, that's key.
We don't change Eager Edgar's config anymore. Eager Edgar kind of just figures out the new set of services and does it. And takes into account training tips that were relevant in the old stuff. They're still relevant, forgets training tips that are no longer relevant because of the refactor. And then if somebody does go in and give a couple training tips, fantastic.
But another way, Eager Edgar could be the first on the list of your PagerDuty list.
Yep.
Hopefully not give it off to another human.
That is for us, because I mean, we don't have the time to like fine tune all of our alerts. Like, it would be really nice. We don't have that kind of time. It's just nice when we can say like, all right, did Eager Edgar think there was an issue with this alert? No, it's just a preempt event. Who cares?
I think there's this point in which a technology like this gets added to a company's common usage and SRE team or something like that. There's a point in which I feel like when someone who is part of the support group or SREs, goes back and said, "Oh, who fixes that?"
Yeah,
and they just say Edgar did, and they don't know it's actually not a human. I think that's where you can define sort of like, we did it, right? or gets the level of it's becoming just another person in some way or form.
I think that looks like success, but I mean, having just come out of a meeting last week, make a bunch of UI decisions on this, to me the big success is, I asked Edgar to do that.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Edgar works like, our assistants do things on behalf of people. And I think when we can put them in that light, we set up the assistants for success.
Yeah.
But we also set up the people for a ton of success. And there's a lot of like subtle UI tweaks that we do around this of like, okay, so who asked Edgar to do this? Who asked cautious Kathy to do that?
Yep.
And you can really start to basically say, hey, it's not only 10x engineers, but it's also people who aren't 10x engineers who can suddenly be like, wow, they're actually a really, really effective manager.
Yeah.
Free digital assistants that are doing a ton of work. And you give that person who's not the 10x engineer the ability to have amazing impact in their organization.
Yep.
I'm excited about being like especially starting my career as a very mediocre programmer. The fact that I didn't have to manage my memory with Java and I did have to do it with C, like, yes.
That's a win.
Do it again.
Gotcha. Okay, so Kyle, I think next question I want to ask is around the troubleshooting scenarios, right? Like, I know you used Nginx and Redis as the two examples. Like, do you see, or can you talk about some really low-hanging fruits or common troubleshooting scenarios that you see right now when you're working with maybe your early design partners, design customers, and like, how are you, like, we're still in the early stages. What are we fixing now, and then what are the next steps?
I mean, the really basic ones are that we did like a year ago now, are like all of the basic kubectl gets across the stuff. And then you start to go in and say, all right, let's go, instead of kubectl get, instead of basic kubectl gets, let's start troubleshooting Helm charts, and let's start troubleshooting things like Flux customizations.
Ooh.
Okay, so now we're starting to get into some of the meta areas that actually do impact lots of other deployments. And then after that, we start getting into Redis and Memcache and Kube, like Nginx, Kong, etc. So I think that was kind of the sequence that we took. And we clearly know after this, we're going to go beyond Kubernetes. I mean, already that's kind of the direction that things are headed. But right now, let me use it as the opportunity to give a short plug. My colleague Shay just started an ugly kubectl party.
I saw that. I need to attend the next one.
We'll put that in the show notes too. If it's
like some of these commands that people like, it's like a paragraph long. You're like, oh wow, actually, yeah, that actually is a lot of. That's the exact output that tells us exactly what we want.
Yeah.
So I think that in addition to going from like the base, like default, to like the meta to the workload, very, very workload specific, we're also going from like, hey, really, really simple commands to really useful ones that if you don't have copy and paste, nobody's ever going to type them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of JQ hell I've been in when working with like AWS APIs or something like that, right? If it was just there for me, I'd be, the happiest camper. So I get the value there. Now,
If I could use that, let me give a small plug for
please.
the Ugly Kube Kettle Party. We also, to promote our authors, we put together a little open source tool that scans people's kube clusters, and it's not a paid product. It's like it's not paid at all. It just scans kube clusters, and it pulls out all of the CLI commands that an assistant could run, and it puts it in a copy paste cheat sheet.
Ooh. Yeah, this is RunWhen local, right?
This is RunWhen local, yeah. Okay. So it's not like, and we did it in a big way. We did it to promote our authors, so that the authors' names like show up in big letters, which I think is really cool. So even if somebody doesn't buy our product, we can't pay the author royalties. But if somebody at least uses this, and we can make our authors a little famous.
Yeah, that's great. And I believe that's open source as well, right?
Yep.
Well, okay,
we're going to post the source.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, that's a good place probably to ask more about where people can get involved, right? So there's open source RunWhen local. If someone wants to become part of the community writing these scripts or earn royalties or something like that, where do they get involved with that, or how do they
just put it all on our docs.runwen.com has all of our technical documentation, and that has the information on joining the authors program.
Gotcha. And what about people who want to try this out, because this is exciting?
So right now, pretty much everybody starts with RunWhen local.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fastest way because there's you don't even need to create an account with us, and you can say, all right, for my cluster, here's what Eager Edgar would do. And then after that, it's a more commercial conversation to set up right now, basically set up a POC with us, but we're going to open it up for GA. It's a little later this year.
Awesome.
But right now it's sort of private POCs.
Gotcha. And anywhere else, is there a place for folks to communicate besides the website, like Twitter, GitHub, or anything like that you would like to share?
Absolutely. So in our tech docs, we put in our Slack channel where we hang out. We put in our Discord channel where people who hate Slack on our team hang out. We have too many repos at this point under RunWhen Contrib, where that's where all of our discussions back and forth.
Gotcha.
It feels like we have a lot of these for a small company.
You're just covering all the bases.
At some point we're going to ask on. I mean, we're going to
do all the things, right? Get them all. Well, that's great. I feel like we could talk about this for hours and hours more. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll have to have you back on the show when Edgar and Ali and those are in their tweens or something like that and grown up. And we can check up on how they're doing. But yeah, I feel like this has been super insightful. I think really interesting topic for folks both interested in AI and what it's what we're using it for in sort of a more general sense, and then obviously those who are in the weeds troubleshooting a Kubernetes. I think this is super valuable. So I want to thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll have you again soon.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, Bhavin, I think that was probably not enough time to cover that entire topic with Kyle. I think I could have talked to him for another 2 hours probably on this show. It'll be a longer episode, but I think it's one we could easily have back on and kind of talk about again. But what do you think? What were your takeaways from that?
No, I think I really liked the episode, right? The way Kyle came in and didn't hype up AI and LLMs to be the next best thing, and everybody should be using that. He's like, no, there is a place and reason for every solution that people are using. So I like the fact that he understands, even though he's a CEO and founder of an AI based company, he's not gung-ho about it. He's like, no, we still need to support SREs by having human written scripts. AI can be the way to surface those scripts, give the user an easy troubleshooting workflow. They can enable them. But again, when anything is touching a production environment, it shouldn't be, at least in 2023, in July of 2023, it shouldn't be completely automated and AI written. It has to be something that a human has written, that AI is just helping you. It's like doing a Stack Overflow search and figuring out the best solution for you, and then giving you that snippet, okay, go and run this, and this can help you solve a specific Redis issue.
Yeah. Yeah, we might get to an Ex Machina iRobot future,
At some
but
point.
yeah, we're not there
Not there
yet.
yet.
That human touch, that trust element, I think is going to be key. And if you are someone working on Kubernetes and troubleshooting, like it's an opportunity for you to give back to a community and also kind of help the tool.
And make some royalty along the way.
Sure, if you want to make
Yeah.
that is cool. Giving some value to those. Yeah, I think that was a really cool part of it. I think just all of this coming from, for me, like a lot of this coming out of real life examples with complexity, right? SREs spending so much time in the keyboard on the terminal. Like I've been there, I get it. And it definitely comes down to there's only a few people that are going to know everything in that stack and know how to understand, troubleshooting everything. So having a tool that can help you get somewhere faster, as a humankind, we're all about that, right? So I think that fits into that sort of human element really well. We didn't do the ChatGPT question, but we asked it, right? Why should an SRE trust artificial intelligence to help them with the Kubernetes clusters? And like, there was a whole long answer, and I'm not going to go through it, but part of it was it should be used as a complementary tool rather than a replacement for human expertise. I really like that line. I don't know where it pulled it out from or anything like that. And obviously we're asking itself to why we should trust it. So I don't know, we should take it with a grain of salt. But I really did like that part of it. And I do feel like that's a big piece of it. The other piece I think Kyle talked about was, people don't just need more chatbots. Like that's how we've been exposed to a lot of this. And there's a lot of frustration there, right? I mean, he gave the example of being on the phone with something. And I recently did, like a few days ago. I'm like, no one wants this. And until it gets way, way better. And so like that sort of persona angle they have going for it, that's, backed by the human elements, the written pieces is really, really cool.
I know. And I think that like the experience will improve overall. Like, chatbots, it's easy for mass consumption. Like, okay, everybody can just talk to a chatbot. But it doesn't have the expertise right now. I think it will improve. I still remember early days of just voice assistants, right? Like I had an iPhone 4S and like Siri hasn't improved that much, but there are other voice assistants.
She's still so frustrating.
But there are other voice assistants that are better. So like, even though everybody loves ChatGPT, it's still early days.
The fact that we're frustrated with it also tells us that like we're itching for more. We're itching for those things, those tools to do more. So,
although like I found out a stat that the amount of like the ChatGPT usage has gone down right now. A few theories to it. High school's been out. People are like, maybe kids are not using it for their assignments. I was like, they shouldn't be using it for their assignments, but like that's one of the reasons being cited.
It's summer. I don't know. Maybe the workforce who are taking vacations are not using it.
This is not just supposed to be used for work. I use it for planning my trips. Like, okay, I instead of me watching 15 videos over a weekend to figure out what are the top 5 spots I should touch in every trip, I just ask ChatGPT, okay, I need to plan a trip to XYZ for 4 days. Can you give me a list? And it gives me a list, which is like, okay, this is a good starting point.
It could be a couple years dated, but yeah.
Yeah. Like, again, national parks, right? Like the hikes don't really change that much.
not that drastically.
Not drastically. So like, it's a good starting point. Saves me like a day worth of watching videos from influencers and then
until that one time where like a volcano took out an entire trail and you show up and you're like, I can't. The ChatGPT.
If that happens, I'll definitely tweet about it. That's my level of rage. I'll tweet about it. That's
nice. Cool. So as we wind this down, we do want to we want to tell our listeners we are taking a summer break ourselves. We talked about some of the trips we're going on. So next episode will be at least 4 weeks out. So we're skipping one. We usually do them every 2 weeks. Hopefully you won't feel lost without us. Enjoy your own summer, I guess I'll say. And we'll be back with a lot of new episodes ready to go down the road. And just a reminder, please come and join our Slack.
Yeah, if you miss us too much, there's always Slack,
Chat with us there. We have it on our phones, stuff like that. We'd love to hear from you there. So this brings us to the end of today's episode. I'm Ryan.
I'm Bhavin.
Thanks for joining another episode of Kubernetes Bytes. Thank you for listening to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.